It was a pretty good Alaska experience. It rained on us the whole time, and it was cold and windy and everything, but we had a great visit with the family, and that's what we were there for. So thank you all for your prayers and your thoughtfulness for my family as we were gone. Today we are in 1 Kings chapter 17, so if you would like to take your Bibles and turn to 1 Kings 17 to follow along today, you are certainly invited to do that. If it's easier for you to just sit back and listen, and it's too distracting to try to follow along, I understand, but you might want to jot a note down if you would like, or just pay attention there and read the passage on your own when you get a chance. Excuse me. 1 Kings 17. Many of you are familiar enough with your Bibles to know that 1 Kings 17 introduces us to a character of significance. He is known as Elijah. He was a tremendous prophet of God. And as you go through the following chapters in 1 Kings, you see Elijah doing some incredible things, empowered by God, working miracles, and pointing people consistently to who God was and is. For our purposes today, we're not as concerned about Elijah, the prophet. We're more interested with the character here who's not even named. And it's my hope that today, maybe this passage will be a real means of encouragement to you. Because there are times in our lives, probably all of us feel very insignificant. You look around in the world and you think, what am I doing that is making much of a difference in this vast world? With the billions of people that inhabit this planet, I'm just one little guy or gal up here in North Idaho. Is there really a point? And absolutely there is. Each one of us has an important role to play, and you never ever know how prominent your role could be in the plan of God. This widow woman, though she's not named, is very important to the story in Elijah's life and the work that God is going to do in the life of Israel, his people. And so I want us to be encouraged by what we find here in 1 Kings chapter 17 as Elijah interacts with this lady and what God intended all along and used as a means of encouragement to her and keeping her in the midst of troubling times. I've got actually 2 points today, a little bit of an extended intro, looking at how she was prepared by the Lord. But then the first point was that she was fed during the famine, because those times come along in our lives when maybe we are not starving to death, but it gets pretty tight. And you kind of wonder, is God paying attention? Does he recognize that I have a need? And he knows your need. Second point, she was given back during her grief with the loss of a loved one in the midst of her mourning. I'm not going to preach this passage as if you grieve hard enough, God will give your loved one back. That would be bad theology. But I do think that we can glean from the text here that God comforts those. And in this case, he gave her back her son who had died. And he is in control of all of that as a means of really bolstering her faith. Today I want to read all of chapter 17, really just to acquaint us with the context. We are not conducting a study through Kings, and so it's a little bit tough here to jump right into the middle of a book, not knowing what's going on in the world at this time. It's about 925 BC-ish, and the world is doing its own thing. And at the time that we catch up here, Ahab is the king, and he's a wicked king. All kinds of badness is going on in the land of Israel. They're worshiping idols. God's people have turned away from God. And yet here is God's man in the midst of all of that madness. And he is trying to point them back to God. And he's fighting an uphill battle. It wasn't a good time for you to be a prophet of God. He is hunted on occasion in his life. Elijah makes a strong stand for the Lord, but it wasn't easy. And that's pretty much the context that we find things here in chapter 17 when we pick up. Verses 1 through 7 are going to be read today. I'm not going to be looking at them following up, but I think it's important for us to just get some idea of what's going on so that when we get to verse 8 and the following verses, that we see where Elijah's coming from and what's going on in the land. So if you'd like to follow along silently in your copy of God's Word as I read out loud, that would be absolutely fine. 1 Kings 17 says this. And Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the inhabitants of Gilead, said unto Ahab, As the Lord God of Israel liveth, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years, but according to my word. And the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, Get thee hence, and turn thee eastward, and hide thyself by the brook Cherith that is before Jordan. And it shall be that thou shalt drink of the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed thee there. So he went and did according unto the word of the Lord. For he went and dwelt by the brook Cherith that is before Jordan. And the ravens brought him bread and flesh in the morning, and bread and flesh in the evening, and he drank of the brook. It came to pass after a while that the brook dried up, because there had been no rain in the land. And the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, Arise, get thee to Zarephath, which belongeth to Zidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain thee. So he arose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, the widow woman was there, gathering of sticks. And he called to her and said, Fetch me, I pray thee, a little water in a vessel, that I may drink. And as she was going to fetch it, he called to her and said, Bring me, I pray thee, a morsel of bread in thine hand. She said, As the Lord thy God liveth, I have not a cake, but an handful of meal in a barrel, and a little oil in a cruse. And behold, I am gathering 2 sticks, that I may go in and dress it for me and my son, that we may eat it and die. And Elijah said unto her, Fear not, go and do as thou hast said, but make me thereof a little cake first, and bring it unto me, and after make for thee and for thy son. For thus saith the Lord God of Israel, The barrel of meal shall not waste, neither shall the cruse of oil fail, until the day that the Lord sendeth rain upon the earth. And she went and did according to the saying of Elijah. And she and he and her house did eat many days. And the barrel of meal wasted not, neither did the cruse of oil fail, according to the word of the Lord which he spake by Elijah. And it came to pass after these things that the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, fell sick. And his sickness was so sore that there was no breath left in him. And she said unto Elijah, What have I to do with thee, O thou man of God? Art thou come unto me to call my sin to remembrance, and to slay my son? And he said unto her, Give me thy son. And he took him out of her bosom, and carried him up into a loft where he abode. And he laid him upon his own bed. And he cried unto the Lord, and said, O Lord my God, hast thou also brought evil upon the widow with whom I sojourn, by slaying her son? And he stretched himself upon the child 3 times, and cried unto the Lord, and said, O Lord my God, I pray thee, let this child's soul come into him again. And the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child, and brought him down out of the chamber into the house, and delivered him unto his mother. And Elijah said, See, thy son liveth. And the woman said to Elijah, Now by this I know that thou art a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in thy mouth is truth. That is chapter 17 of 1 Kings. This nameless character in God's word is significant in God's plan, as he uses her to meet the needs of his prophet by meeting her needs. By way of introduction here, verses 8 and 9 show us that she was prepared by the Lord. This widow woman lives in the city of Zarephath. And if you were to look on the map, as the Mediterranean Sea comes in from the west, along the shore there on the east side is the Holy Land. About halfway down the coast of the Mediterranean Sea on the east side, if you were to draw a line across, you would find the Sea of Galilee. And out of the southern part of the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River runs down to the Dead Sea. Just off the east side of the Jordan River was the brook Cherith, where Elijah is coming from. And he had to make his way approximately 55 miles up to the city of Zarephath, where the widow woman lived. Now, it wasn't a tremendous city. As a matter of fact, just south of there on the coastline was the city of Tyre. It was a much more significant city, a port city. And yet, Zarephath still would have had a number of inhabitants. She's just one of many people. And I guess that's my point more than anything else this morning. We live in a land where you look around, and even in our church, as small as it is, you feel like, well, I'm just one person. How much difference can I make? And yet one person is very, very important. Here's this widow woman. Her husband, obviously having died, many believe probably just not long prior to this, and she is left with a small son. Okay? How important is this widow woman? As people are living in the city and all about town, not that significant of a character normally in the culture. And yet God has a plan for her. She was prepared by the Lord. It says there in verse 9, as God is talking to Elijah, he says, "Get thee to Zarephath, which belongeth to Zidon, and dwell there. Behold," here's the key, "I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain thee." God's already in touch with this widow woman. We don't know exactly how the Lord spoke to her. It was kind of just a stirring of the heart and an understanding in her mind of a plan that God had, or if he spoke to her audibly and she heard him with her ears, and he said, "I'm going to be bringing my prophet along. Make sure that you give him a place to stay. Make sure that you feed him, and take care of this guy." I don't know how all this was communicated. All we know is that God tells Elijah, "Go to this woman. I'm making sure that she knows that you're taken care of. I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain thee." She's prepared by the Lord. She was to care for the prophet of God. Elijah had prophesied the drought and famine. We saw that earlier in the reading as he goes before Ahab and says there's not going to be any dew, there's not going to be any rain. Elijah had been cared for by Cherith and Gilead. And all of this, God has a plan. And obviously, Elijah, if you know much about the Old Testament scriptures, being a prominent character, goes on to do more and more things. But what if Elijah had died in this famine? What about the showdown with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel? What would have happened? But God is taking care of his man, and this is one of the means that he's going to do it, through this widow woman. So now, having been spoken to by God, she has a very important duty. So verses 10 through 16, we see first of all that she was fed during this famine. She was taken care of. In order for her to meet the needs of God's man, the prophet Elijah, she had to have some means herself. So notice what it says here. "So he arose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, the widow woman was there, gathering of sticks." I love this, because these are real people. Right? This isn't just a story. This isn't something like Aesop's fables. Here's these two characters and there's a moral at the end. These people really lived. This widow woman actually was alive. I believe we will meet her in glory someday. And she is doing what people do. Right? It's a time of starvation. We already know that there's a drought in the land. There's no dew. There's no rain. So much so that the brook that Elijah has been living by has not got any more water left in it, so he has to make his way up to Zarephath. And this woman is outside of the city of Zarephath. She's gathering sticks because she's got to build a fire. We're told in just a little bit what the fire was intended for. But here's this woman, as he comes to the city, outside there, doing what we all do. Gathering sticks to build a fire. Here in North Idaho, we build a lot of fires. Yesterday, we just got home yesterday afternoon. We unpacked everything. And I'm thinking, oh, good, I get to go to bed. And as I look out the window, our neighbor right over here to the south, which is directly east of me, I'm watching, and there's this smoke coming up, and it looks like the opposite side of the house is on fire. And we see our neighbor standing out there with water spraying, and I'm like, oh, drats, I don't get to relax. So I quick throw my shoes on and run out there and get in the truck, and I'm going out here, and I see she's got a big old burn pile built off. But from my angle, it looked like the house was on fire. Flames coming up. I'm like, oh boy. So you got a big burn pile over here. I'm like, okay, relax a little bit. I went on home. We burn things around here. It's just what we do in North Idaho. We burn sticks. But we especially like a campfire where you can roast a hot dog maybe or make s'mores. This woman is gathering sticks because she's fixing to prepare a meal. Did you ever wonder what she must have looked like out there? Remember, it's a drought. It's a famine in the land. I've always imagined that she is probably skinny. They have been making the food last as long as they can. And she's down to the last meal. This is a very pitiful kind of sight, if you can imagine it in your mind's eye, as Elijah sees her. She's out there gathering these sticks. And he called to her and said, "Fetch me, I pray thee, a little water in a vessel that I may drink." "Excuse me, ma'am. Would you get me a cup of water?" Now, think about this. For most of us, that's not a big deal, right? And we live in the Northwest. There's lots of water here. If we had a drought here, okay, we'd probably notice it in about 10 years. Go down to the river, you get your water. These people have been right there in the Middle East. They've been now in a drought for some time. The brooks are all drying up. The fact that he asked her for a drink of water is significant. This isn't easy, but she has to do it. And she's willing to do it. And as she was going to fetch it, he spoke to her again and said, "Bring me, I pray thee, a morsel of bread in thine hand." Now to me, as I'm reading this just seems kind of pushy, right? "Hey, excuse me, ma'am, can you give me some water? I've been traveling a long time. I'm parched. I need some water." And I don't know what her reaction was like, but she was willing to do it. I kind of wonder if she turns away and she's thinking, "Oh, man, get your own water, fella." And she's going to get the water. I don't know. Maybe she said, "Sure, I can get you water." And she's off to it. I don't know exactly what her reaction was, but she's willing to get the water. Then he calls out and says, "While you're at it, getting the water, bring me back some bread." "Okay, fella, you already asked for water. I can get you the water. But I can't get you the bread. And here's why. As the Lord thy God liveth, I have not a cake. That is, I don't have any bread, but I've got a handful of meal in a barrel, and a little oil in a cruse. And behold, I am gathering 2 sticks, that I may go in and dress it for me and my son, that we may eat it and die." Many preachers have preached this text before. Many good sermons have been developed out of this. And I've heard many. And one of the interesting points that many of them have made is this whole statement about we're going to eat our last meal, but then we're dead people. I believe that this woman believes wholeheartedly that this is the last meal her and her son are going to eat. Now, can you imagine what that must feel like? We are, pardon the expression, but I think it fits. We are fat Americans. I've never been in a position where I didn't know if I was going to make it through the week because I didn't have enough food, ever in my life. The hardest times Anna and I have ever known, we ate hot dogs and potato chips for about 3 months straight. And it was awful. Oatmeal in the morning, hot dogs and potato chips. We'd just gotten out of college. Times were tough. Boy, oh boy, were they tough. We had to eat hot dogs and potato chips. I never wondered, I wonder if there's going to be hot dogs tonight. I knew there were, unfortunately. Oh no, it's hot dogs again tonight. I've never been in a position where I looked around and I said to myself, "This is the last hot dog." And the cupboards are bare. There is nothing to eat after this. I'd like to go over and see my neighbors from the church. You know, they've still got beef in the freezer. No, the neighbors don't have beef in the freezer. You look around, everybody's in the same position you are. We've all got 1 hot dog left. That's it. There's a famine in the land. And this woman has just a little bit of meal in the bottom of her barrel and a little bit of oil in the bottom of her cruse. And can you imagine what that looked like? As she lifted the lid to her pot of meal or flour, as she looks down in there, there's just a little bit. This is the kind of scene when you're making biscuits and you don't want to run to the store because we live out here. It's at least 15 minutes to the store. You got to buy it, then you got to get back and everything. You're making dinner and there's not enough flour, and so you're hitting the sides and you're tapping every little bit out that you can. This is her just to survive. She's got just that little bit down there. And then when she lifts the lid to the cruse of oil, there's just a few drops. If she can drain it out to make the last little bit of bread. I think of it in terms of like maybe just a biscuit. That's it. That's all she's got. And she can't go to the store and get some more. Store's out. Been out for a long time. She can't go to the field and harvest more grain. That crop hasn't grown in a couple of years. She can't go to her neighbors. They don't have anything. This is it. She says, "I'm going to prepare the last that I have for me and my son. We're going to eat it, and then, probably within a few days, we're going to die. There's just nothing left. And you have the nerve to ask me for bread. And Elijah says to her, don't be afraid. You ever wonder what his tone was like? As I read this, as I'm reading through, it's not very fair. I don't know what the tone of Elijah was like. Did he say, come on, woman, suck it up. Don't be afraid? I doubt it. I kind of think that Elijah had great compassion. I know you're concerned. I know you think this is the end. But don't be afraid. I want you to go home and do like you said. Prepare your meal. But I want you to bring me bread first. Then you and your son can eat. And the Lord will take care of the need. The flour will remain in the barrel. The oil will remain in the cruse. And God will supply your need. And she went, verse 15 says, and she did according to the saying of Elijah, and she and he and her house did eat many days. The picture here, or the context, would lend us the conclusion that as she went back to the barrel of meal, every day it was probably the same exact scenario. She lifted the lid, and wouldn't you know it, there's just enough in there again. And she lifts the lid on the cruse of oil, there's just enough in there again. Next day she goes back, well, just enough. Just enough. She was not in a position where she could take that and say, whew, I got so much flour in here, I'm going to start selling some down at the marketplace. It was just enough. We live, most of us, in that realm of just enough. There's not many of us in this church who have got, well, if any in our church, that have got wealth. Right? We just trust that our bank account's full. I really don't have anything to worry about. Most of us have to live pretty tight, right? But isn't it funny how God takes care? There's always just enough. Even in those hard times of life, you look back and you think, how do we make it through that? You do the math and it doesn't add up. But God takes care. He meets the need and there's always just enough. And the barrel of meal wasted not. Neither did the cruse of oil fail, according to the word of the Lord which he spake by Elijah. She was fed during the famine. Her situation was dire. From this we would understand that God does great work through those who are at his mercy. When we need him, he is able to do great things. Remember when Jesus was teaching his disciples, and he says that it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than for a rich man to be saved. Right? And at that time, apparently they saw the man door that went through the city gates as the eye of the needle. But I believe that what Jesus was referring to right there was literally the eye of a needle. And his disciples reacted like we all would and said, well, that's impossible. You can't get a camel through the eye of a needle. I have a hard enough time getting a thread through an eye of a needle, let alone a camel, right? And Jesus' very next statement was, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. When you think this just cannot happen, and we're doomed for sure, it seems like God comes through in big ways and you think, my God can do it. But I'm so dependent upon his mercy because I can't make it happen. He can. And he is given glory for that. God does great work through those who are at his mercy, and this woman certainly is. Secondly, her faith was strong enough. Maybe she didn't have the faith of Abraham, but it was strong enough. God does great work through those who trust in his ability. Those who look at God and say, I know you can. I know you can. Now, you may not, but I know you can. And in this case, this woman had to leave Elijah, think about this, and go back to her house and prepare the cake and then take it back to Elijah so that he could eat before she and her son ate. This to me demonstrates a real measure of faith. as she's making that biscuit in her house, do you ever wonder what must be going through her mind? This is great. This is great. Lord, I'm going to make this last bit of bread for this prophet who can't think to provide his own lunch. And me and my son are going to die. Or did she make it thinking, okay, don't know how this is going to work, but God will take care of it. She takes the bread out to Elijah. She comes back. There's flour enough for her and her son. And he takes care of it. There's a real measure of faith in her actions here. She believed God, and it was enough. She was fed during the famine. Secondly, she was given back during her grief, verses 17 through 24. And it came to pass after these things. Now here's a significant statement. It came to pass after these things. She's eating. Every day got meal in the barrel. Every day got oil in the cruse. Makes more bread for the day. They're surviving in the famine. And everybody around must be dying off. There's not much food. But she's taken care of. And in the course of time, that the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, fell sick. And his sickness was so sore that there was no breath left in him. It's a very palatable way, I guess, of saying he died. He got so sick that he died. Now, this is like a bad story getting worse. There's a famine in the land, and now there's a little bit of hope. She is eating with her son, and Elijah is there. He's living with them now, and God is taking care of their needs. But her son now gets sick. God's taking care to make sure they're fed, but the son gets sick to the point that he dies. And this lady's getting put through the ringer. You ever been in those times of life? Maybe you are in one now. And you're thinking, God, what is going on? Most of us probably start talking to God in terms of, did I do something wrong? What am I supposed to learn here? Just tell me what I need to do. I'll fix it because I don't like this situation. This stinks. Right? So we're going through the midst of hardship. There's a famine in the land. This lady is, now her son dies. And she says to Elijah something that I think is so natural. What have I to do with thee, O thou man of God? Art thou come unto me to call my sin to remembrance and to slay my son? Now, it's already said that they've been eating many days, verse 15, in the house. Things have been going along. Not great, but they're surviving. Now her son dies, and she looks at Elijah and says, what have I to do with you? Did you come here just to rub my sin in my face so that my son would die? What's going on? It's hard times. Very hard times for this lady. Her child had died. In this, I think we can learn that God is often seen according to our emotional state. Is this true in your life? It is in mine. When things are good, I tend to look at God and say, God, you are so great. Oh, I love you. And then when times are really hard, I say, God, what's wrong with you? Where are you? I need you right now and you're on vacation. And I get upset with God. And thankfully, he's merciful with me. He doesn't zap me on the spot. He lets me grow and learn. But I find a lot of times my interaction with God is really based a lot on my emotional state. And this woman, we certainly see just natural humanity. She is grief-stricken. Her son has died, and she now is speaking to Elijah in terms of, did you come to just rub my sin in my face, and now my son is dead? The frustration. And he says to her in verse 19, give me thy son. And he took him out of her bosom and carried him up into a loft where he abode, and he laid him upon his own bed. The picture here is of a grieving mother holding her son. And in my mind, I've always seen her there rocking with her son as she weeps, dead. His limp body just hanging there. And Elijah has to go and pick this boy up, and he takes him upstairs to where he was living, and he lays him on his own bed. And there he cries out to the Lord in verse 20 and says, O Lord my God, hast thou also brought evil upon the widow with whom I sojourn by slaying her son? This isn't Elijah's fault. I appreciate the fact that he goes before the Lord on her behalf. Here I am. You're taking care. You're meeting needs. We don't have a lot, but you're taking care of us. And now you let this boy die? And he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried unto the Lord and said, O Lord my God, I pray thee, please, God, let this child's soul come into him again. This is quite a prayer, right? He's not putting his hand on this sickly child and saying, God, heal him. He's asking for this dead child to come back to life. That doesn't happen. And yet Elijah, I think in this prayer, exhibits great amounts of faith. I trust that God, you can do it, and so please, Lord, send his soul back into his body that he would revive. And the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came unto him again, and he revived. Now, I've already told you that I'm preaching this passage from the perspective more attention is given to the widow. So I want you to think for just a second about what the Bible is not telling us here. Okay? We see clearly what the Bible is telling us in the account as Elijah is upstairs and lays down on this boy 3 times, crying out to the Lord for help. But did you ever wonder, what's the widow doing during this time? We don't know, and so I can't preach this with authority, but all I can say is she's not just disappeared from the planet during this time. She is a grief-stricken mother, still downstairs, while Elijah is up there calling on the name of the Lord. As any other human being, I'm sure she is in real turmoil of soul. She's weeping, probably, and praying hard. Probably. Right? I'm just guessing. And it says that the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came into him again, and he revived. He comes back to life. And Elijah then took the child and brought him down out of the chamber into the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, See, here thy son liveth. He liveth. According to King James, he liveth. Right? What was this like? Again, real people. Mom is down there brokenhearted. Elijah now sees the boy's life, comes back to him, and he takes the boy downstairs. As he's coming down I don't know if they had stairs or a ladder or what, but can you imagine what the emotional swing was like? As she is there weeping. Her son is dead. Her only family left alive. Her husband has died. Now her son has died, and she is in despair. And she looks up, hearing maybe the creak of the stairs. There he is. And God supplies a magnificent need. God often works to restore our faith in those times of despair in our life. I've seen it happen in my life. Many of you have seen it happen in yours. If you're in that place today where your heart is broken, for whatever reason, it's just being torn apart within you, know that God is able to restore. I know that it doesn't seem like there can be a tomorrow. How am I going to get through this? A couple of years ago, I was